Hello and welcome. Wagner's Prigozhin is saying they are going to withdraw from Bakhmut because the Russian military doesn't support them enough and their losses are unsustainable. This and more in the Situation Report. Ukraine has exchanged 45 soldiers against 3 Russian pilots. The soldiers, at least according to reports, all of them or almost all of them were Azov fighters that had fought and had been captured in Azovstal. There are reports that Ukraine has actually shot down a Kinzhal. This is a hypersonic missile, as the Russians brand it, launched from a MiG-31. It's basically a remodeled Iskander ballistic missile, and now the first one seemingly has been shot down. Ukraine's military is saying it was intercepted by a Patriot. This is obviously a big blow to the Russian propaganda when it comes to the success of their hypersonic missiles, because hypersonic missiles are supposed to be impossible to intercept. Right now, we are seeing more attacks with Shahid drones originating from Iran. Russia either has received a big amount of resupply or they started the production themselves as was initially planned, because by now almost every day there are reports of Shahid attacks in the 2-digit numbers. Prigozhin has now declared that Wagner is going to withdraw to the 10th of May from Bakhmut. He's saying that the Russian military is not giving him enough ammunition on purpose. They intend to not give him enough, probably because the military is jealous of Wagner's successes in Bakhmut, and as those are shining a bad light on the Russian military's competence. It's quite possible, though, that his own predictions, his own aims to capture the city until the 9th of May he realized they are no longer possible, and thus he tries to withdraw in time to hand over the responsibility of the failure to someone else, which he would obviously achieve if he blames the Russian military as having sabotaged his effort, and if he's left the situation because the Russian military was no longer able to or willing to support him. That would make him from a loser to a victim. In a video, he was showing hundreds of Russian, roughly 100 fallen Wagner personnel, and directly said the Russian military leadership is responsible for that because of lack of supply. He's insulting Gerasimov, the chief of staff of the Russian military, of the Russian general staff, and Shoigu, the defense minister, personally in very harsh words, to a degree which so far has not been audible. So he seems to actually be enraged by what is going on. Right now, there's this letter going around, which accordingly to the translations and according to what is said, he's asking the Russian military to replace Wagner troops with the Kadyrovtsi until the 10th of May. Kadyrovtsi would be the Ahmad groups that are from Chechnya. They are Rosgvardia, recruited by Ramzan Kadyrov, personally loyal to him. That's why they're called Kadyrovtsi. The issue is, though, they are at best light infantry. They are Rosgvardia and thus not really trained for combined arms warfare. How well they would fare in Bakhmut is up for the question. The lack of quality by the Kadyrovtsi, should it come to that, will obviously open up the room for counterattacks by the Ukrainian side. And finally, we have this here. This is the one of the former deputy defense ministers of Russia. He was sacked recently. His name is Mizintsev. He had the nickname the Butcher of Mariupol, and Prigozhin offered him a job in Wagner when he was fired, and he seems to be in control of Wagner troops now. So supposedly he's the deputy Wagner commander by now. The reason for that can obviously be speculated, but there is some speculation that this might be with the hope to have better access to the logistics with an expert like him in the deputy command of Wagner. When it comes to the front line north of the Seversky Donetsk, we have reports of an attack, or at least the Russians pushing in the direction of Novoselivke. This is the first attack basically north of Makivka for quite a while, the first attack that we've heard of. And south of it, the attacks are continuing, mostly close to Dibrova and here in the forest. I cannot confirm any successes, though, and it seems to indicate that the intensity of the Russian attacks is further going down, another indication that the Russians are shifting to the defensive. South of the Siversky Donetsk attacks on Bilohorivka, some Russian claims that the Russian forces have gained some ground here in the south. It seems at least indication that there is a Russian advance southeast of Bilohorivka. I cannot fully confirm it. The videos weren't clear enough to me, but at least according to the description, they are showing Russian advances in this area, so it's fairly possible. In Bodanivka, further south, we have reports. I mean, there are reports of fighting along the front line here, now and then small attacks, but heavier fighting was at Bodanivka. First, Russian attacks were reported, then Ukrainian counterattacks. The front line seems to be more or less the same. Whether the Russians have advanced in the meantime and then have been pushed back, I cannot really confirm here. We have an impressive picture from Bakhmut here, showing soldiers supposedly close to on the road from Khomove, close to it. This should be the so-called Citadel, and you can see the background in the background how it looks. So the look into the area is supposedly roughly from here, from these hills somewhere down here. They are looking on this picture, and there has been also shelling of the Citadel, as you can see here. This is the nickname it was given because it's a complex of high-rise buildings, as you can see here, which have a good view of the surrounding area, and they have been shelled with incendiary ammunition by the Russians there. There are some claims that this might actually not be intended for the infantry there, but rather to destroy their vehicles that they usually park in under camouflage close to the buildings. So this is quite a possibility. We also have a video showing Russian advances. It shows it has been geolocalized, and we can see it here right south of that reservoir. So more or less the Russians are confirmed to be here as well now, east of Khomove, closing in further into the center of Bakhmut, or into the rest of Bakhmut, I have to say. Center is here and is captured by the Russians for quite a while. The Ukrainians are thus reacting to it. What we see here is one of the examples. If you watch this here, this is not the first time we've seen it. It's the Ukrainians preparing buildings to be blown up, usually with the suggestion that they have been blown up after Russians have entered them to occupy them, to basically slow them down, and whilst make them more hesitant, as they will obviously be less willing to storm buildings when they are afraid of the buildings being blown up around them. This should slow them down, and at the same time, every time they blow it up, they deny positions through the Russian side, especially elevated positions, and they have a chance of causing casualties. So this is done the same way, and it was on the eastern side of this should be more or less here on the eastern side of the Citadel as well. And finally, we have a video here of of Ukrainian MBTs engaged in fighting. You see them here shooting at short range into buildings. This is another example of why urban combat is combined arms warfare and not just infantry. You see the tanks here playing a massive role in shelling positions of the enemy from very close proximity. This has been geolocalized as well, and it should have been here, I think. So the Ukrainians are pushing back. The Russians are trying to slow them down, and at the same time, another example of the usage of tanks, and an example and a proof that the Ukrainians still have tanks within Bakhmut. Further south, there are reports of attacks on Ivanivske. No confirmation that they have been successful in any ways, but there was a successful Ukrainian counterattack in the direction of Kurdiumivka, but the gains were negligible, so they basically gained a little bit in the tree line. But another small Ukrainian counterattacks, of which which seem to be more and more happening over the past few days. Further south, close to Avdiivka, we have reports of minor Russian gains west of Novobakhmutivka in the direction of Novokalinove. There are also reports of attacks in the direction of Siverne and of Pervomaiske. There was a Ukrainian counterattack in the direction of Staromykhailivka. Another Ukrainian counterattack. I cannot confirm that it has achieved anything whatsoever. Fighting is also continuing in Marinka and in the direction of Novomykhailivka. Girkin is saying the Ukrainians have had a successful counterattack close to Vuhledar in the direction of Mykilske. There, he claims the Russians were pushed back to the outskirts of the town. And there are reports of a Ukrainian reconnaissance attack, so basically reconnaissance in force in the direction of or on Pavlivka here. So if those reports are true, then on both sides of Vuhledar, the Ukrainians are slowly pushing forward, trying to probably pressure the Russian position that is still threatening Vuhledar. On the southern front, we have several reports of repulsed Ukrainian reconnaissance and force attacks. Those is the size of the attacks. One time mentioned, for instance, 15 Ukrainian soldiers. This is not an all-out assault. This is not the counteroffensive, what is expected, but this is quite possible as the number of attacks is increasing, that the Ukrainians are currently basically trying to feel the front line, to feel for pressure points where they should create their Schwerpunkt in the near future. This overall, though, is, as said, not the outbreak of the big offensive, but a more Ukrainian offensive activity. On Kherson, we have the report of a unusually heavy artillery bombardment of the town itself. The Ukrainians report that 550 grenades were shot on the city of Kherson on the 3rd of May. The GUR spokesperson, that's the Ukrainian military intelligence, Vadim Skibitsky, said the Russians are preparing the whole back area for defense. And what's really interesting is that he talks about Mariupol, that Mariupol is preparing a circular defense, basically more or less expecting to be cut off, and that the Russians are also putting an effort in restoring the harbor installations, the harbor infrastructure, which would then in combination indicate that the Russians expect that it's at least a slight possibility that Mariupol could be cut off. So they want to prepare the possibility of supplying it by sea in that case. Generally, when it comes to the overall developments on the front line, we see Ukrainian attacks intensifying, but nothing close to what can be called the big counteroffensive. Obviously, this is a definition question. If you look around, you'll find people saying the offensive has already begun. The preparational work, all the HIMARS attacks in the background, all the artillery attacks, the drone attacks, all of this is basically a preparation of the offensive and thus can be called part of the offensive. For instance, we have an intensity of attacks on Russian fuel depots in the past few days. If you want to interpret it in this way, which then you can say the offensive has already begun. If you want to talk about the main ground combat operations, not just being the last part of the whole offensive, but as the main part, then this part at least has not begun yet. So the main ground combat has not begun yet from a Ukrainian offensive, but everything we see is indicating Ukrainian preparations for said offensive. But this is at least hitting some roadblocks in some regards. The Kiev Independent is reporting here that CNN says HIMARS are increasingly becoming less effective because of Russian jamming. That was to be expected, to be honest. The GPS can be jammed. The Iranians have even done that like 10 years or more ago when they captured the Ghost of Kandahar, a stealth drone, by jamming and falsifying GPS data, supposedly giving the drone the indication that somewhere in Iran was its actual base in Kandahar, so it tried to land on Iranian soil, allowing the Iranians to capture it. So that this was to be expected should not be much of a surprise to us, but while the missiles should still be able to get close to their target with their internal internal navigation system, obviously GPS jamming will reduce the effectiveness. And the Ukrainian Resistance Center is saying that in Bryansk and Kursk, which are here, the Russian units are receiving Ukrainian uniforms, so they are expecting false flag attacks somewhere happening here for whatever reasons. Speculations are going into hostage taking or anything like that, with claimed Ukrainian forces doing something in these regions. So we will have to keep an eye open in case we have reports of anything like this happening. And CNN is reporting here that the chief of US intelligence is saying Russia is unlikely to mount a significant offensive this year in Ukraine. So even if Ukraine's counteroffensive more or less stalls or fails, the Russian deficiencies in manpower and equipment will be so big that there are no significant gains to be expected for the rest of 2023 inside of Ukraine. From the Crimea, we have reports that the Crimean Bridge seems to be blocked. There are also reports that ships are piling up in the north and the south, so there might be a blockage. But there are other reports that this might be due to jamming, as the Russian side is increasingly afraid of attacks going on the Kerch Bridge. It's quite possible that they use electronic warfare there that blocks both AIS, as in theory even the communication of cell phones or anything. So this just appears to be blocked. It would have to be observed if the AIS signals from the ships are suddenly jumping south of the bridge, which then would be an indication that the ships are actually moving in between. But as of now, at least the reports are, the claims are, the let's call it rumors are, that the bridge is closed for road traffic and for ship traffic. So there is no movement over the Crimean Bridge, over the Strait of Kerch whatsoever right now. When it comes to the mobilization or force generation, we have something in the opposite regard. Ukraine is claiming that in April 3,200 Russians have capitulated, have given themselves up, 10% more than in March. There is no way for me and for us to really confirm that number. We cannot go there and count, so that number could be completely fictitious. It could be the truth. I have no idea. Just to put it into some perspective and to put it to stick to the facts. And we have reports also from Ukrainian side, which we have no way of confirming, that says that in a study of prisoners of war, 40% of them that participated in that study voluntarily surrendered. So they basically gave themselves up when there was no urgent military need for said thing. 40%, which would obviously be a fairly high number and an indication of the willingness to fight. There's also, the same study is saying that they were not motivated to fight. The majority of them was not motivated to fight to save Russia or anything like this, but 55% were fighting to increase their situation of their livelihood in this as a motivation. And an interesting indication is what was said, that 80% of the prisoners are unhappy with their leadership, which would indicate a problem in discipline, and obviously soldiers that don't trust their superiors will be more hesitant to follow orders and thus be less efficient. And finally, only 17% are saying that they were fully equipped with ammunition in that report. Again, here, just in full transparency, this is Ukrainian saying. We have no way of confirming what they said. We have no way of confirming if that study actually happened, how fair it was, etc. Those are just numbers the Ukrainians are giving us. We can decide to believe them, or we can decide not to believe them at all. And finally, when it comes to the political sphere, we have reports from Zaporizhzhia that the Russians want to, as they call it, evacuate 70,000 civilians. Obviously, depending on which side you follow, it's them evacuating them to save them from Ukrainian attacks, or it's the Russians preparing a deportation into Russia to basically steal the men, the people there, in case Ukraine regains its territory, so they still lose at least the manpower in this area, depending on whom you believe. When it comes to international support, we have reports here that that on the June 1st, so in just 1 month, 80 Leopard 1 supposedly will be ready for operation in Ukraine. That's obviously a huge amount that suddenly is going to be ready fairly soon. Those are the reports here in Radio Svoboda, which should be affiliated to Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. And we have images of the Russians taking out T-64A out of storage. So Russians are still digging into their storage and are getting out older and older material here in this regard. But the T-64A is obviously significantly older and worse than this T-64B, especially the BV version that is used by Ukraine. But you can say on the other hand, at least the Russians still have something to take out of storage. Ukraine's storage of tanks should be more or less empty for quite some time in this regard. And finally, to finish it up, we have an interesting method to employ an RPG-7, as you can see it here by Russian soldiers. And I guess that also works. This was it for me for now. If you enjoyed this content, please hit the like button, leave a comment for the algorithm, and if you enjoy this here and you are new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting the channel, and this was it for me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.